Hi everyone, Joe March with the Grand Infinity here, and today I'm talking with Student of Rhythm. We're going to be having a discussion about religion and the occult and how they sometimes intermix well, sometimes don't, how well they play together, things like that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit with Student of the Rhythm. Can you say a little bit about yourself?
Hello, I'm the student of rhythm. I do have a little YouTube channel. I've posted a few videos, not very many. So I'm a Mormon. I live in Utah.
Hmm.
I've got kind of the Mormon pioneer credentials, I suppose you could say. I was born in Utah, moved around a lot though. Um, I'm I do I write. I'm a musician.
Hmm.
Those are amateur things. My 9 to 5 job is in something else, and so it's sort of a pays for
Yeah.
pays for these other things.
Hmm.
But I've been interested for a long time. I've been interested in things like magic ever since I was, I suppose, a child. Certainly when I was a teenager, and over the past year or two. Some of my research that I was conducting about psychology and other things started to evolve to such a point that I
Hmm.
found myself finally taking the plunge, I suppose, to seriously practice or engage with magic as such. And it took me a while to get there. And so watching your videos for the past year or so, and when I saw that you had started to do this series, I thought it might be interesting to have a little chat. So here I am.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think there's a lot of Mormons who practice this sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a specific um, there's a couple things, and there's a couple reasons why. I mean, like a lot of Christian denominations, there's certainly a fear of that sort of thing or mistrust. A lot of it has to do with labeling, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree
There's,
with that.
yeah, yeah, and that to me has like been one of the biggest things about my own experience and how I've come to terms with reconciling the interest I had and reconciling the desires I had and the messages I was getting from culture and from specifically religious teachings versus culture. There's so it's interesting actually. There's actually the church has a specific direction against doing stuff with quote the occult.
Hmm.
Now this basically came about in I think the late 80s or early 90s as a result of the satanic panic,
Yeah.
and it was sort of like they were really afraid of, they just wanted to discourage anybody from messing around with stuff that was, evil,
Hmm.
which is, interestingly enough, it was about maybe 3 or 4 years after that that there was a historian that came out with a book basically showing that how Joseph Smith had been a magician
Mm.
and had done a lot of stuff with folk magic, and that the founding experiences of the church themselves came about sort of as a result of his involvement with folk magic, and that was not welcome news at first.
Hmm.
There was some controversies and some various things. It was maybe about, oh, I'm going to get the dates wrong. It was a few years ago that finally the church commissioned somebody to write an approved official biography of Joseph Smith, where he basically faces up and says, "Yeah, the Smith family was into magic.
Hmm.
Joseph did all this magic stuff. When he translated the Book of Mormon, part of it was a magical process." And I was reading this, and I thought, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's really wonderful."
Some of the ideas I think, and I don't know a lot about the Mormon faith, but some of the ideas I've heard sound similar to occult ideas, like about the
Yes.
way they view the afterlife
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to how other Christians view it. It sounds more in line with what I would think happens, with a bit of the Christianity also. But like it's, I don't know, so, like some of the things I've heard about the potential of basically controlling your own planet or your own world, or that
Yeah.
sort of thing is kind of what occultists believe as well. Is that if you take that your imaginative energy with you over there, and you can create. So
Yes. When I
it's
first
interesting.
started when I first started reading about Crowley do you pronounce it Thelema? Thelema? Anyway, it really struck me some of the resonances and similarities. So I haven't delved deeply in. I guess I should confess that most of my Crowley research, I like to say Crowley, most of it is consisted of Wikipedia and things like that. But there was a quote, something to the effect of "Every human being is a star."
Yeah.
And that struck me. I thought, oh my goodness, that's what we believe.
Yeah.
Because we have this whole idea of every human soul being co-eternal with God, and this little spark of intelligence that's without beginning, without end, and of infinite potential.
Yeah.
And when I was reading, I've read a fair bit of Carl Jung's work, including some of his less psychological, more Gnostic work, the Red Book and the Seven Sermons to the Dead.
Yeah.
The Seven Sermons to the Dead really sent me on a trip because he talks about this whole thing, but then he comes around to this idea again that of every soul sort of, I'm gonna butcher I'm not gonna do it justice, but the idea again of this sort of having this destiny of becoming this. He says something about how you become your own Abraxas to your own creation. I thought, goodness gracious, this is what we believe, even though
it even matches my own personal beliefs, because I have the belief in what I call the divine spark.
Yeah,
is that there's this spark of energy within you that's basically like a piece of the divine, and then you're kindling it, you're making it bigger. It's kind of the whole process of this. Whether some left-hand pathers will call it the black flame, or some people on the right call it the divine spark, I think we're talking about the same thing.
I definitely think we're talking about the same thing, and it's so interesting to me how people get so hung up on the labels or the words or who's saying it.
Yeah.
It's funny. There's sometimes I listen to some heavy metal, and there's the band Death. They did their album Symbolic in 1994, which I think is one of the best dang records ever. But it was so funny to me. I was listening to it when I first discovered it, and there's just this, wailing guitars and crushing rhythms, and Chuck Schuldinger's growling and everything, and he's growling about reaching into the dark, retrieving light, and all this stuff. And I think it's because a death metal guy is singing it that nobody's saying, "Oh, come on, get out of here with your religious stuff."
Yeah,
I think. Everybody, it's something that's been with me for quite a long time, just sort of this perception that people, even if they are coming across as sorceress or as black magic or whatever, they're searching for the same thing when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and there's maybe some different beliefs about how we go about it or what that thing is, but the overall search is the same.
And those specific beliefs have, for me personally, come to have a lot less importance. I've come to the attitude that a lot of what we're taught of, every religion has their dogmas, right? Saying, well, for us, for example, it's, we have, we lived with God before we were born. We lived as spirits. We came to earth. There's the resurrection. There's the judgment. There's the kingdoms that you might go to, and to me, a lot of this has come to be a lot more important as one angle, as one metaphor, trying to convey sort of a transcendent truth or trying to propel us towards a certain way. I guess one way that I like to say it is that revelation is pragmatic rather than absolute. That if we have, for example, in the Book of Mormon, most of these kind of doctrines that kind of set us apart or that are kind of distinctive to us, they're reported by characters, by people in this book as having been revealed to them by angels. I know that we're going to resurrect because an angel told me. And I think, well, so people would recoil from the idea that God would ever tell us a lie, but there's a really sneaky little bit in one of the revelations that Joseph Smith brought forth, and basically it says, these words are, paraphrasing here, but they are true even as I will. In other words, that the divine can give revelation and can speak to somebody in a way that that person understands and that their cultural context and their audience is going to understand. And that doesn't mean that we should latch on so tightly to their words that we start to make it into some kind of literal, factual thing. We can kind of start to see this is expressing a truth. It's expressing a metaphor we can understand, but we don't have to be so cocksure about, oh, well, I know that it's going to look like this when we die. Well, to me, it's a lot more interesting if I adopt the attitude of this is the path this is the way that I'm approaching it, but I know that the name that can be named is not the eternal name. There's something beyond there that we're all going to experience in our own way.
Yeah. And an interesting thing about that, too, is, in all of these texts, whether it's the Mormon Bible, the Christian Bible, the Quran, there's always angels talking to people and giving them a lot of information. And sometimes the entire book is supposedly provided by translating something from an angel. And yet a lot of believers usually will scoff at someone like me who evokes demons and angels because they're like, you can't do that. It's like, well, you're in their religion. It's based around the idea that somebody did that.
It kind of that's really hit me, and that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I was watching a thing where Alan Moore talks about his views on magic, and he says something like, where it used to be that people where people routinely would have their own communion with the divine. Now it's that your religion basically tells you don't have to commune with the divine because you have people to do that for you. Actually, you just have a book about some people long ago who did it for you. And I thought, ooh, ouch, touche. Because I thought, this is something that's interesting because there are aspirations in our faith, in our doctrines and our teachings and things. Aspirations, certainly there's like an imperative for people to get their own connection in certain respects. So, for example, the Book of Mormon, there's this part of it that basically says you can get your own connection, your own witness of its truth from the Holy Ghost. And so that's very much encouraged. But at the same time, there's definitely a shying away when people start talking about having visions and things. And I've always found that curious. I did we do these volunteer missionary service trips for 2 years. And I was in Puerto Rico, as a matter of fact. And people down there are often pretty visionary. We talked to a lot of people that had dreams. There was one lady that said that she had a visitation from, I think, the Virgin Mary. And so it was always, that just nagged at me, this sort of wondering, why is it that my colleagues are so quick to dismiss all of these as devilish deceptions while we have the real truth? And I think there's got to be more to it than that, than just saying, oh, well, we can just say, it's like the Charlemagne's Knights in the Song of Roland saying, well, it's just that we're right and they're wrong, and that's all there is to it. God's bigger than that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if you get down to the nitty-gritty of what I believe compared to what most Christians believe, the base of it is not too dissimilar. It's just that I don't believe the Bible literally, but being someone who does evocations, my experience with any of these type of beings is that they talk in metaphor, and they talk in these kind of like hard to understand cryptic messages. And so to me, the idea that somebody was told by an angel this information, I'm like, well, it's got to be metaphorical information then. And that's how I read it when I read it. And it makes sense to me as a metaphor when I read it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
Cool.
Jesus says to be like I am, you were like me, you are me, things like that. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. This is all resonating with the way I believe things too. But a lot of people hate that. If I try to come in with that angle of it, they're like, no, you're trying to skew it.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But, because, and I guess I could borrow a phrase from, there's this Italian writer, Umberto Eco, died, I think, a couple of years ago, God rest his soul. I was hoping to sort of talk a little bit about him. I'll leave it for now. Basically, he had this phrase, cogito interruptus. He'd love to do these, wicked little puns and plays on words, but
Hmm.
the idea of that you just sort of stop your thought at a certain point.
Yeah.
There's a certain boundary that you mark, and beyond this point, here shalt thou go, but no further. Just don't think beyond that. And it has frustrated me for years
Yeah.
within my own faith community to see how people police this boundary in their own minds, and beyond that, they just will not think, because you kind of start to investigate and kind of imagine, well, if we believe this and that, going further from that, it's going to lead us to some suppositions or conclusions, and it doesn't have to be wacky stuff like oh, does God really live at the center of the Milky Way galaxy? Like, not I mean, there's some really ridiculous things that people come up with, but and it's partly because they won't bend their minds towards like a really careful consideration of what these sorts of things mean spiritually. They kind of have to go off into these other weirdnesses, like when it comes to trying to reconcile like accounts of mythical events like the flood or things, and trying to take them literally. I gave that up a few years ago because I thought I can't I can't give up my God-given intellect to that extent, and I no longer feel like it's expected of me to take some of these things literally.
Right.
I can value them very much as myths, and think that these are really important and powerful truths that they teach.
And what's interesting is you get the same value out of it. It doesn't distract from it to look at it that way. The story is still the story. You still get the lesson and the moral from it. But people just don't like the idea that it could be a story and not something that you can go find facts and figures to prove. It's like, well, what's the difference? I mean, if the point of the work is to teach you how to live, then that's the point of the work. It doesn't have to be a history book then. It's a how to be book.
Yeah, but it's tremendously liberating when you cross it. And so I kind of, I'm kind of caught between, sort of, I guess, almost a missionary zeal. It's ingrained kind of like wanting to share that and show that look how liberating it is when you think about it this way.
That's a dangerous stance.
It is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes, because then you get so there's a lot that I just keep to myself. I still attend and practice and things, but there's a lot that I just sort of keep under my hat, as it were.
Yeah. And then you've got people over in Utah like E.A. Koenig.
Is he here?
I think
I knew that Angel was, but I didn't know E.A. Koettig was.
Yeah, okay. Angel's there now. Angel used to be in the Bay Area, and then he moved out there. But that's one of the things he's brought up. He's like, I'm in Koettig territory now. I'm like, it's not really Koettig territory.
No.
It's Mormon territory.
No, yeah. I really need to connect with him, because I think it'd be really fun to have a conversation with him. I think it would be a gas to actually go and visit him sometime. He posted one little video about how he thought, like, there's all this magical energy around here, and I posted a comment. I said, it's Timpanogos. We've got this mountain here. It's like this really prominent. Well, it's the whole Wasatch Front. I mean, there's all these mountains, and there's just, to me, ever since I was little, I mean, and everybody feels it. These mountains, they just cast a spell on everybody here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I noticed that Angel has trouble breathing sometimes there if he walks around, recognizing the difference between where he grew up and where he is now.
4,000 feet. Yeah.
His body's got to adjust.
Yeah, it's true.
But there is a dank burrito shop there, apparently. That's one of the things I picked up from multiple videos he's put out.
Burrito. Yeah, I should watch more. My watching of his channel has been a little bit sporadic so far, but yeah, it's fun to. I guess in a way, I somehow see a little bit of myself at a younger age in him, and that's bittersweet because I'm 40, so I'm like, oh, to be young again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting though that it seems to me that there is a little bit more spirituality out there. Whether it may not be a cult, but there's kind of a greater belief in I would say, the spiritual side of the religion.
Yes, and I think I hope that that will grow.
Hmm.
I have a personal, sort of personally, I have a great frustration with part of the culture of this place, and in my grumpier moments, I want to blame it on my fellow Mormons. There's this, so you might hear people talk about how Utah's like this great growth area for the um, software industry, right?
Hmm.
And people talk about Silicon Slopes, and so what it um, what it means is not only do they build buildings for Adobe and I don't know whoever else software,
Hmm.
but one of the biggest booming industries out here is call centers, it
Oh
seems,
yeah.
and I have to say, sketchy business practices as well.
Yeah.
And I often drive through areas. You can kind of really see the different layers of history. One of them kind of violently trying to wipe out the other.
Mm.
We have in among us a fellow who died a few years ago. His name was Hugh Nibley. He was an apologist for the faith, but he was also just a blistering social critic,
Hmm.
and he take us to task for being so greedy
Mm.
and so blind to the value of things that endured, and so eager to tear up the old buildings and put up big tech, tasteless new growth.
Hmm.
There's been, we were this area was settled by people that had this kind of utopian communitarian vision that has become very alien. Mormon culture nowadays is just very rugged individualist. To my great despair, the state came. The state helped elect the he who must not be named in the White House right now. So, and I don't want to get inside any political controversy in any. I suppose I don't. My point is that it's fascinating. This happened about the time that statehood occurred. That it was founded on this idea of this communal utopian vision, and there was a lot of it was the subsistence lifestyle, and nowadays that's sort of we've kind of joined along with a general scorning of that and thinking that progress means there's fewer gardens, and people are building all these newer houses and things, and the old houses had gardens. It used to be, you're in Utah because there's all these houses with gardens. It was like a Mormon thing to plant gardens. And I thought that was just a really wonderful thing, because you can't get too much into gardening without retaining some kind of, this connection, when you're working with plants and with the earth that grounds you to a certain extent.
Mm.
And so it troubles me to see this reverence for the land and this kind of simplicity and this humility really being let go of
Hmm.
in favor of trying to show how big and sparkly we can make everything. So
Maybe it's
I'm
just something that
yeah,
happens over time. It seems like that happens to a lot of different groups if enough time goes by.
yes, I think it does. And we like to pretend that we're immune from it. But as an institution, certainly, I don't think any institution can be fully immune. And I think one of the hardest tasks, I think, for anybody who is in a faith community that they really believe in, is to reconcile the very banal doings of the institution with the highest ideals of what it teaches.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that I think is interesting is there's a lot of people, either in the atheist community or some people even in the occult community, who want to blame Christianity for a large number of evils and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And one of the things that I've found, at least in my observations of people, is that I don't think that has a lot to do with it. Maybe in the past, when you had the Catholic Church able to do certain things where they command groups of people, armies, and things like that.
Right.
But for the most part, what I found is that people who use sort of like religious rhetoric in order to justify doing something to someone else. Well, if you take the religious rhetoric away, they just use something else to do it. That's who they are. It
Hmm.
doesn't seem like it's the religion that causes that. At least that's what I've observed. I've seen people who were once religious and acted that way, where they would find the passages in the Bible that support whatever it is they want to discriminate against. And
Hmm.
then they become an atheist, and then they start using the law to do the same
Hmm.
thing, the exact same thing. And so I look at it like you just are finding excuses in whatever it is that you believe in at the time, which means the religion had nothing to do with that person being that way. And so
I,
I've just observed this sort of behavior in people enough to go, I don't blame the religion for that.
I think you're right. I think there's yes, that's a very good point. Let's see if I can articulate this thought, because and the promise of certainly the promise of Christianity in general is sort of this idea of becoming new, becoming renewed and becoming changed, transformed, which is what's wonderful is, that's kind of the goal of magic too, is this great
Right.
work of transforming yourself.
Hmm.
And so um, it's always been interesting to me to see there's this great project afoot, and it tries to get people to really examine themselves and change themselves, but at the same time you just sort of have these really tenacious character traits found in
Yep.
these people that sometimes all this religion and everything just doesn't really touch. So I guess now maybe I might mention Umberto Eco as part of my experience.
Hmm.
Now, he wrote, I don't know if you read any of his books.
No, I haven't.
So, one of his most famous books is a novel called Foucault's Pendulum,
Mm.
where he kind of mercilessly pokes fun at occultists.
Hmm.
And he was pretty skeptical about any of this sort of thing.
Hmm.
He was, like any Italian who raised Catholic, and then, like a lot of Italians, he basically left the church. He did give a very interesting observation late in life, where he said something like that if the church if the church teaches nonsense, at least it's a good nonsense, for lack of a better word. Like it's just like what we were talking about earlier. The
Right.
myths and the stories have a value
Yeah.
to them, and
If
he
you
says,
can use it to better
yeah,
your life, then okay.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And he says, the commercialism can't even offer that. But so he, being very skeptical, kind of like to poke fun and sort of protest that a lot of times when you had a big surge in interest in the occult happening in a society, it correlated with political reactionism.
Mm.
People love to talk about the Nazi obsession with the occult and things
Hmm.
like that.
Yep.
And it's very much perceptible, the idea of this fascination and esoteric occult things or Gnosticism. It does often go closely with this certain kind of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
So to me, that was a big turnoff for many years. I thought, oh, okay, I'm so glad I read Echo, because that just sort of lets me know that these people are just, silly. But at the same time, I kind of had to admit basically the same point that you just made,
Hmm.
that the people that are going to take the message of a religion and just sort of not really let it change them, but kind of
Hmm.
use it to justify whatever their unchanged personal problems are going to make them do.
Yep.
They're the same kind of people that are going to do that with magic. They're the same
Hmm.
kind of people that are going to set up the lodges or the
Yep.
orders, and they're going to be the ones lording it over everybody else and saying, I'm the grand mugwump and you got to all,
Yep.
So,
Yeah, that's a big part of why I'm a solitary practitioner. Not only is it just that I learned this on my own in the first place, I like to study in that way, but also since doing that, I've never found a desire to get into a group. I
yeah,
always feel like groups have this tendency to have people in them that aren't actually legitimately trying to do the same thing I'm trying to do with this.
yeah.
They're trying to use it to game the system in some way or get something out of it, and I don't want any part of that. But
Did
I
you ever
think
read
that
this?
just
Yeah,
happens with any group, in like any group of
yeah.
anything.
Did you ever read the Sandman comics?
I
Movie
haven't
and
read them myself. I know about their storyline. I'm a big fan of the the Lucifer TV show that's on right now,
Oh
even though that's kind
yes.
of skewed from the original comic.
Right.
But that's from that same world setting. So
It's
like I'm
still
aware of the
delightful.
world setting
Yeah.
and the characters, but I haven't actually
There's
read them.
there's a in the first one of the I think the first issue there's this English occult society. Maybe that's supposed to be based on the Golden Dawn. I have no idea.
Hmm.
But one of the members is saying to the other guy, you know, the order isn't just to get rich and get laid. Sometimes really freaky stuff happens.
Yeah, right. Hmm. But that's what it seems like with a lot of the groups. I mean, even with Freemasonry, some people will get into Freemasonry because they want to learn these secrets that they hear so much about in the
Yeah.
conspiracy side of things.
Yeah.
But low-level Freemasonry is mostly just help your fellow man, go out there, do charity for people and stuff like
Right.
that. And so a lot of them are left wanting. They're going, well,
Yeah.
I thought we were going to get into magic and stuff. But,
Yeah. Where's the yeah.
and that doesn't mean it's not in there in some high-level point. That's what's theorized by a lot of people. But, it's not what people think it is for a lot of times. A lot of times the groups will just be that. And, maybe the entire lodge was never based around that, the one that you join,
Mhm.
And so even though somewhere there's a lodge where there's a cultist, this lodge is not that lodge. So,
Right.
oh well, you're not part of
Oh.
that. Like it's people being people, and it's just the way it works.
Yeah.
I feel like people like us are kind of seekers, where we want to seek the truth and we don't know why it matters. Because
Yeah.
technically other people don't need to know it, and it doesn't seem to bother them in the least not to know it.
Right.
They just get through
Yeah.
life.
Which
But it's part of
kind
who
of
we
boggles
are.
my mind.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's part of who we are, and whether you're going to be in a religion or an occultist or whatever, our personality is going to take us that way. Because the same way as that other person's personality is going to make them find the loopholes and try to use that to do something.
Hmm.
It's just different people, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
an
And yeah.
uptick in occultism doesn't necessarily, I think, mean, I don't think it causes or is necessarily caused by the authoritarian shift. But
No.
there seems to be a correlation. Correlation isn't necessarily causation, but it could just be that whatever it is that pushes society in that way also pushes a lot of people to fringe belief systems. Because
Yeah.
cult tends to be a fringe belief system.
To me, it became important to distinguish between, I suppose, occultism and magic, or
Yeah.
and again, you get this sort of discussion about the different words. It's
Yeah.
occult because it's hidden, and should it stay hidden? And is this really about hiding things from other people, or is it about really the search after
Right.
truth and after enchantment, which to me I think was one of the biggest things from when I was young, is sort of, I guess maybe a lot of what I feel myself doing is reconnecting with a certain childhood view of the world.
Yeah.
Part of it is comes from being a parent and seeing that in your own children, in
Yeah,
my own
definitely.
children. I've got this 9-year-old daughter, and some of the best magic I've ever done is quite honestly doing things to help her sleep better at night. She gets bad dreams or whatever, and so I'll do things like enchant little things or do these little things so that she will sleep better at night. And so some people might look at this and say, oh, you're just playing around, and I think, you know what, I'm doing something that's
If it
bringing
works.
yeah like
That's even why I get into the whole is it psychological or spiritual thing on the channel. Even though I've come to believe it's all spiritual now, the reason that started out as a dual parallel possibility was because I recognized that if I'm wrong about the spiritual side, there's still psychological benefits going on, and they should
Mhm.
be explored. And so I've always thought, like, well, first and foremost, does it make the change happen?
right.
And the answer is yes. So
Yeah.
then we move on to the refined, like, why does it work? What is it? And things like that. And those are the answers that nobody, I think, actually has 100%.
Yeah.
But those answers don't matter as much. They're not going to stop me from practicing. They're just things that I'm like, oh, now I just want to know that. Like, I'm
Right.
seeking that because I can't help but seek that because that's my personality.
Yeah,
But
I think
the
it's
craft
kind of
itself works.
yeah. No, I think it's a natural human thing. This curiosity of wanting to. I mean, that's what drives the scientific method.
Yeah.
The scientific revolution is people just wanting to
Hmm.
understand how. And to me, I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I just think, well, I don't really want to get too much into the how, because maybe it destroys the enchantment of it. But then sometimes, you get people saying, well, it's so much more, the universe is so much more fascinating the more you know about how things work.
Hmm.
And I can understand that a lot better now.
Yeah, definitely. Now, will my ideas change, in the next 2 years? Of course they will. Will
Yeah.
they won't change as drastically as some people might like, but they'll definitely change, and I think that's normal. I think that's healthy. But
Yeah.
that again, that's part of my personality. I think that I've always been that way. I don't think it has to do with the occult specifically so much as it's just, I'm naturally that type of person who seeks and wants to grow and learn, which has led me into being interested in these things just for that reason.
Yeah. Well, I take it as a healthy humility.
Hmm.
I guess one of the things that keeps driving me back to faith, for lack of a better word, is just sort of this coming up against, I mean, I've been at points in my life where I could have maybe, where I felt, I guess I've sort of flirted with materialism, or felt
Hmm.
like, just sort of getting this kind of
Yeah,
nihilistic, oh.
I've
But then
tried it
again, yeah,
too.
yeah. And then I just keep coming to this point of like, well, but we have this tremendously complex, okay, so the brain, it's all in this matter, but the matter makes this, and we come up with this tremendously complex system of our minds, and our conscious and our unconscious minds and everything. And I think, just sort of keep coming up against this, I guess, this pragmatic dedication of like, I can't live as if it doesn't matter. I
Right.
can't
Yeah.
bring myself to like say, oh, it's just all for naught and it's just random. Maybe some cool atheist could say, well, you're just flawed because you can't admit how meaningless everything is, and
They're
say, oh,
just
well,
trying to be
whatever.
edgy if they say
Yeah.
that.
I take great solace from something else that Dr. Jung wrote, where he says, and once again, I don't have the exact quote with me, but um, how people could just sort of say that it's all meaningless. And he says this is the sort of grumbling that's the prerogative of it's the prerogative of habitual grumblers with bad digestions.
Hmm. Yeah.
Nobody, and he says something like, nobody can know what the ultimate things are. We must take them as they come. And if something helps you to live better, you can safely say this was the grace of God.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and even most people who were philosophical nihilists weren't really people who thought everything was pointless and that there was no purpose. They just felt like that purpose had to come from within. So it was
yeah,
just a different perspective of it. So a lot of times when people start to say things like, oh, this particular belief system you should just believe in nothing or whatever. It's like, well, nobody really believes that. I don't. I think
I
that's just
know.
somebody being edgy.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, yeah,
And maybe some people
it's
do. I don't know.
maybe
Maybe there's a
it
few.
kind of, it continues to fascinate me. There's a fellow on YouTube named Aaron Ra. I guess that's his name. He's this,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I like watch some of his videos, and then I like back off because he
Hmm.
gets kind of militant atheist, and I'm thinking I can't get all the way behind that. I can I can totally dig what you're saying when you say, the thing. I can respect somebody having the attitude that life is precious because it's short, and because I think religious people kind of use a lot of our beliefs about the afterlife and things as a crutch to kind of get us out of the responsibility of actually doing more with our lives now.
Hmm.
Oh, it's all going to be made right later on, so we can just sort of, we don't need to worry about the environment, because Jesus is going to come and sweep the earth clean anyway. So, burn that coal, or we don't need to worry about this or that because it's just, God's just going to sort of wave his magic wand like he made all
Right.
the animals fit on the ark somehow, and it's
Right.
just all going to work out. I just don't, and it's like we're kind of shirking this responsibility that, if we believe that we're on this earth to like really
Hmm.
develop our minds and get in and understand things and actually do something with it. I mean, there's a lot we can do to shirk that responsibility, and sometimes, religious dogmas can be used as a justification, as a smokescreen for that.
And free will comes into play too. You don't really have free will if you don't have the ability to destroy.
Yeah.
So obviously you can screw everything up for yourself, because that's part of the gift, quote unquote.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's just a really fascinating thing about looking into, magical belief systems. People talking about this, about the will and about all this sort of thing, because that's a huge thing with Mormons, is this idea of agency, of being able to choose. Again, people kind of take it, quite literally in a certain sense, but this, this powerful myth that the whole reason that our concept of Satan and how he became the devil is that he tried to stop people from exercising their agency.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
sort of like how the Gnostics view the demiurge.
Yeah.
Kind of idea.
Gnosticism is so fascinating for that reason. But yeah, so and that's like explicit. Like we have this totally different angle on the fall, on how it was all, God was in on it the whole time. Like he set up, Satan to entice them, like it was absolutely necessary for them to fall, to step out of this wholeness, this pleromatic state, to break. Because if everything had just stayed how it was, there's this I'm almost wanting to say it's almost a Gnostic kind of
it sounds
philosophical thing.
Sounds a lot like it.
Yeah, one of the guys in one of the first books of the Book of Mormon, there's this old, patriarch prophet right before he dies, and he's sort of giving this kind of radical interpretation of the fall, saying this had to happen for people to be. And he says, if everything, there has to be opposition. If everything were all as one, it would just be dead. There would be no point to anything. Everything all just being perfect and inert. There's just no movement, no growth, no variety, no nothing.
Right.
And so there has to be that breaking apart, that departure, and I think Mormons kind of have a hard time going maybe all the way with this, because we kind of like to sort of hedge our bet saying, yeah, but it doesn't mean it's okay to sin. It wasn't the sin what they did, but at the same time, because nobody wants to condone sin, say it's okay, because people are afraid that if you do that, then everybody's just going to go out and go crazy and do all this evil stuff. Yeah. And I think, well, you have that little faith in our divine spirits that are supposed to naturally want to do good.
That's one of the things that a lot of atheists like to throw around that I always do find funny, is when they'll say I'm a good person, I don't murder, I don't steal, and etc., because I don't feel like people should do that to each other. And he says, you don't do it because that book says. Well, what if you don't believe in the book anymore? Are you going to do that to me? It's kind of like, obviously not. Obviously we feel that in most of us feel within that these are wrong things to do regardless of religion. But it gives that viewpoint when people use that statement that, like, oh man, if we don't say it's bad, people will do it. It's like, no,
right.
Not necessarily. I mean, some people will, but those people, again, we're probably going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Or, my idealistic, optimistic take is that, people that, I do believe that everybody comes to Earth with a purity, and people oversimplify this and make it instrument. Oh, you just think society corrupts people. Yeah. No. But the early environment that somebody has, it has a tremendous influence. If somebody is in an abusive home or what have you, there's very real consequences that can pollute somebody's purity and make them into malignant personalities of all sorts.
Well, even our culture does that too. And not necessarily in a bad way. You could argue good and bad points for it, but it does change whatever the inner human state is.
Yeah. And that to me is like one of the reasons why it's so important to be open-minded and to constantly be digging after truth, because part of it is like people just sort of say, well, this is how I am. Well, how I am, it's to me is like this fascinating project to really try to figure out who the core is behind all this, behind what happened to me when I was, 3, and what happened to me when I was 7, behind what happened to me when I was my body was still growing in the womb. If my mother, got too much secondhand smoke, or
Right.
behind all these things that shaped who I am, and just the thought patterns of my time and place on the earth. Yes, those make me who I am, but behind that, there's a core. There's something before, and that to me is what's really fascinating to search for.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. It's another one of those things that everybody wants to know and nobody can find.
Yeah.
But one thing I always enjoy is when people argue about the I guess it's called turtles all the way down. That's usually what people
Mhm.
call it. Where you say, well, if God created the
Yeah.
universe, who created God? And you do that whole backward thing. The
Yeah.
problem is the current scientific theory is that the Big Bang created the universe.
Yeah.
You're like, well, what was before the Big
What
Bang?
was
And they say
before that?
nothing. I'm like, this is the exact same answer.
Yeah.
Like, no,
You're,
I get
and you're
that
just trying to wrap your mind around
scientifically,
the
right? I get
mystery
that
of nothing.
scientifically we have to accept that we just don't know, and I'm fine
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
But technically, isn't the religion doing the same thing when it says that? It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know what came before God, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. It's just it always makes me laugh that you'll get atheists arguing that point. Like, you can't just believe in God because what created God? And you're like, okay, what's before the Big Bang? Come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't like either of the arguments on that because I don't see myself as an atheist or a Christian or anything else. But
Mm.
I have my own belief in the grand infinity, that everything is connected and that is God,
Hmm.
which I don't think is actually all that different from Christianity. But
I don't think so.
that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't question where did God come from because God is the whole universe. God would have come when everything else came. But
Yeah.
that still doesn't say what was there before that. It's the
Right.
same problem.
Right.
There's no answer to that question, and I just have to go, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great freedom in admitting this is where we get off.
I don't know, and I can't know. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh well. And it just seems like the scientific community is quick to be like, oh, we can't see what happened before the Big Bang because obviously we can't.
We can't. Yeah. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the right
It's like,
instruments to ask.
you're right. Good point.
One of the things that we get maybe a bit lampooned as Mormons about is kind of people think of us as kind of like a spacey religion.
Hmm.
We have this lovely little hymn that we sing to an old Irish tune, but it talks about no man has found pure space nor seen the outside curtains where nothing has a place. Basically that.
Like the void.
Yeah, there's just this limit. And actually, the hymn actually more emphasizes just the endlessness of everything. There
Yeah.
is no end to being. There is no death above. There's no end. And
Yeah.
to me, okay, 5 billion years, the sun's gone. The universe, spreads out and dies, heat death, or scrunched back up. So, yes, technically, there's an end to it.
Right. But that
But after
assumes this
that,
universe is all there is,
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. And again, it's sort of like this pragmatic attitude, like what does it really mean to me to everybody has to grapple, I guess, with these sort of
Hmm.
existential crises. If I really believe that everything's just going to go out into nothing in 5 billion years, what does that even mean to me now with a lifespan of maybe 100 years if I'm lucky? Come on.
That gets into the cosmic nihilism side, which I always
Yeah.
find really fascinating. It's something that I like to play a head game and go into that thought process for a while, but I always come back from it. It's just like, as much as I
Yeah.
try, I'm like, well, sometimes I'm like, maybe I could totally go that direction, but then like I only stay there for a little while and I just come back.
Yeah.
Like something in me is just like, nah, that's not what I feel.
Yeah.
But
Likewise.
maybe that's, oh, you're just not built to handle it. But it doesn't seem that way because when I try to dive in there deep, it doesn't really scare me. It's something where I can be like, okay, I could accept this.
Hmm.
It's just kind of boring. I don't
Right.
know.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a
And it
good
still
way of
doesn't
putting it.
explain what's going on around me. It's like, okay, well, that's cool for later, but still, then what is all this other stuff? And so
Right.
that's not a point against it, just a point of like, I get interested in the now again, and then that doesn't matter. That's out of mind. But sometimes I like to go into that thought, like, man, what if everything just is destroyed in the end, and nothing
Yeah.
we ever did mattered, and we don't even exist anymore? Like everything is gone. There's no point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting thought experiment.
It is.
And it forces you to ask yourself, are you living the way you want to live?
Well, see, that's maybe its value then.
Hmm.
And if you're really thinking, yeah,
If like there really isn't
yeah,
anything to what you're doing in the long run, then everything that matters is in the short run.
yeah, and then what we do now really does matter, and how I live my life today, and the decisions I take, and how I interact with people, and
Right.
everything. It becomes tremendously important, and really isn't that again?
Yeah.
That's to me, that's like really what all religions have always been trying to teach, and keep
Mhm.
getting bogged down and just sort of like, well, but let's look forward to our future reward, and it sort of starts drifting off course. And really, the main message was supposed to be turn yourself into somebody, into your best self, into who you're supposed to be right now,
Yeah, right
and
now.
do something right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point of meditation too. It's like let's
Mm,
live in the moment. Let's pull you into this state of being here now,
yeah,
at least for a little while, and then maybe you'll do it a little more and a little more each day in your day-to-day life as well. You'll be more present. And that
yeah.
presence will keep you from worrying about what happens in the eventual heat death of the
Well, it's interesting. The more I've looked into, going back, I know we're getting short on time, but going back on what we were saying about, kind of looking for the big secret of power
Mhm.
and things. But um, it seems like a lot of magic is sort of like just validating things that I had come to realize. You know,
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in my life just sort of sitting and thinking, or having thoughts just go really fast, and
Hmm.
thinking about life, and coming to these kind of conclusions about how life should be lived, and the it's been a very great comfort to me to see the agreement, the
Hmm.
concord, the connection of so many things kind of coming back to saying the same thing, and kind of motivating you towards the same thing, this self transformation. And I think, well, okay, yeah, there's certain things that I want to do. I mean, I do meditate every day. There's certain things that I'm trying to do as practices, but I don't want to lose. Whereas before, when I was a teenager, I'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons. I thought, wouldn't it be
Hmm.
actually cool if you could actually do some of this kind of stuff in real life? And
Yeah.
you have to kind of get beyond that and say, oh, well, it's like you're seeing life again with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, for lack of anything else, even though people will take themselves really seriously, I think I just saw, and I think now I'm quoting E.A. Koetting somehow. I don't know how that happened.
mm.
But he just recently put out a video, and I was watching it, and I was like, dude, he's right about this one. That like, if you're not having fun while you're doing it, maybe you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
Like, don't take it too seriously, because when it comes down to it, most of what you're doing with magic is either trying to learn something you didn't know about everything around you, trying to learn something you didn't know about yourself, or trying to
hmm,
manifest something that isn't currently in your life.
yeah,
Sometimes it may be about changing something about yourself, self-transmutation as well. But it seems like those are kind of the four main things people will use it for. And
yeah,
you can do that in so many different ways in the occult
yeah,
that it's
yeah,
like, pick one that's fun.
yeah,
Why not?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Because
find one that works and find a way to make it fun. And that way, it's not a chore to do it. It's just something. It's now you get to have fun and better yourself.
yeah, and your life becomes enchanted. It's not a dull,
Right.
materialistic, or machine like, or just um, consumer, go to work kind of life. It's a life with this certain vibrancy, this certain color to it, that I think, again, for me, that was kind of maybe one of the big things. And yeah, like a lot of times, you see sort of the kind of people that are into the occult that you kind of maybe find it easy to maybe laugh at,
Hmm.
because it becomes sort of like a aesthetic affectation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you understand why that is because everybody's searching. I think our souls naturally are trying to have an enchanted life.
Hmm.
That's who we are as souls, as we are
Yeah.
enchanters, and we want to have this existence that is full of this wonder and this joy.
There's also a degree of creative expression because, as you had mentioned, you've done music and writing and things like that. I'm someone who's done writing. I've dabbled a
Hmm.
little with music and stuff. There's a
Yeah.
creative desire here that we we it's not our main job.
Hmm.
It's on the side,
Yeah.
and so it feels good also to make your practice creative then if you're someone like that,
Yeah.
because then you're also allowing that to get out of your system, because it's anyone who's got that creativity knows that it builds up if you don't let it out.
Oh, yes.
So it's like you have to express or it won't. It just like builds in you.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it other than that.
There's that great. I said in the Gospel of Thomas, I think, where Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you, and if you don't, it'll destroy you."
hmm Again, I agree. That's why it's so funny. It's like, yeah, from an esoteric standpoint, all of the stuff makes sense to me.
Yeah.
A lot of the rules and things don't, but that's
Right.
just because to me, but they do make sense in the time. That's the thing that
Yeah.
gets me the most. Like don't eat
Yeah.
shellfish. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because if you don't cook that right, it'll kill you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
We can
certain
cook it right now,
strategies. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
how many people died because they ate shellfish back then? And what do you think when you see that happen? Like, we're not supposed to eat this.
Right. Right.
So I
Yeah.
feel like you got a dash of that mixed with a dash of esotericism, mixed with some of the trying to make all of that fit together, because
Hmm.
that's what each one of these religious texts are, and they're doing their best job at a way to live currently. And
Hmm.
currently was when they were written, so sometimes some of those rules don't quite apply anymore, but the
Right.
more esoteric ones tend to last beyond that point.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the same thing with studying the occult. Some of the occult stuff we're studying is from, I don't know, like John Dee's time and things like that. We're talking
Right.
about the Renaissance. Like a lot of that isn't going to vibe with the way we live our lives now. But that doesn't mean there's not value in the content. You still got to look into it and think like, what can I gain from this? What can I take from it?
There's a particular program that I'm studying with now. It's headed up by a magician in England. It's called Quarea, and
Oh yeah,
yeah, the big emphasis of this is trying to get at the enduring stuff behind all the
yeah,
historical trappings. She said a lot of what people do now is somehow traced back to the Golden Dawn, which was a Victorian artifact, and I'm really trying to dig underneath the
hmm
layers of historical um,
That's
deposits.
that's why Joseph Campbell is interesting to me too.
Hmm.
He talks about the different mythologies and how they're similar,
Hmm.
because you're seeing repeating patterns throughout history where this culture made this story, but it's similar to this culture's story and stuff. And a lot of times people try to connect that in the base, but I see it more as like talking about human nature. These are
Yeah,
stories that survived in two different places.
yeah,
So they're very true to how humans view themselves.
yeah,
Otherwise, they wouldn't have. And then the same thing with these practices. You see certain elements of these practices, across different nations and stuff. You're like, those elements must be the right parts of the practice. Those are the parts that work.
hmm
That's what makes the practice work. And so if
or
you were to
yeah,
refine all of those, you start to find this like combined everybody doing the same thing stuff. And you even see
yeah,
it in other religions like Christianity at that point.
yeah, yeah,
Even
or different.
prayer could be a sort of form of affirmation slash
Oh yes.
manifestation if it's done
Oh,
the right way.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, there's a children's author named John Bellairs who wrote a delightful book called The Face in the Frost, where
hmm
this wizard finds a prayer book and he says something like, "A really good magician could shake the earth with some of these prayers."
Yeah, yeah, and I believe that too.
Yeah.
If that's the way it resonates with you to do it, and if you're able to pray with that conviction and emotion,
Hmm.
which is a big part of all of these practices, then why wouldn't it
Yeah.
work exactly the same? I think people just don't do that when they pray. People
Right.
robotically pray because they don't know
Right.
how they're supposed to pray. But
Yeah,
then
and
that
people
gets
are.
into the idea that
Yeah.
all of these religions are doing magic if you do them right as well, which then
Oh
we get
yes.
into a whole other
It's
bag of worms.
it's it's like you having for me I feel like I've crossed this divide where to me it's sort of become self-evident, like really obvious. Like, well, of
Yeah,
course religions are doing magic, like I realized, like, oh my goodness, I've been doing a form
yeah.
of ceremonial magic for the last 20 years.
hmm
And but I had to really cross a divide to come to acceptance of that. Before that was like, no, they do magic, we do
Yeah.
religion, they're not the same. Magic is a counterfeit of religion.
I
I'm
think
thinking,
I think it's also because a lot of texts will say magic is bad.
Right. Right.
That immediately makes everybody go, okay, I can't do that. That's bad. That's of the devil. That's whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, no. And also, we don't know what they were talking about as magic back in the day.
Exactly.
Are
And
they
so much
talking
is
about these
dependent on.
practices, or are
Right.
these practices things that have kind of like stemmed out of people taking stuff from religions? It's
Yeah.
not even what people practiced as magic in the past. We don't even know that.
Well, and this is where studying linguistics, as I did, can be really helpful, because you start to see what different translations make, and what a different
Yeah.
cultural context make, and things you can call the same thing by different names, or different things by the same name. Um, you know, yeah. There's all sorts of fascinating discoveries that people are making about how the Old Testament has been changed, and the way that ancient Israelite religion used to be, and how we think it was, and how it really was.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think about, there's a passage in the Book of Mormon where the author is lamenting that there was, sorceries and witchcrafts and magics all over the land, and this is kind of, when I was young, I just sort of took it at face value, saying, okay, anybody that ever does anything like that is just.
Yeah.
And I look around now, and you can't drive anywhere without seeing billboards, and you can't turn on the TV without, or heck, you can't even get on the internet. You can't watch a YouTube video without somebody trying to sell you something with all these tricks, all these psychological manipulations. There's magic everywhere.
It's
We're
magic and
surrounded
sorceries all
by-
across the land. Yeah, that's right.
And so, is it that people are trying to use techniques to make things happen, or is it that people, because you can use various techniques for selfish and just short-sighted, greedy ends, or you can use them for good ends, and so looking at things from a certain perspective of kind of an ethical standpoint, you think, I guess that was, to me, one of the things that I came to, is I thought, well, if I have my if I've got my ethical stance right, what's wrong with learning some techniques to do things a bit more adeptly, to like be good, to get skilled at making things happen?
Yeah, I've had a conversation with a few Christians too who also were occultists, and their view on it was, what they think is that in the past, if you were a priest or a monk or something like that, magic was okay if you considered it faith, because you were doing magic under the will of God, and you considered it magic or sorcery if it wasn't being done under the will of God. And so to them, it's not don't practice magic, it's don't practice magic for your own self-interest. It's practice it as a servant or something of that nature, which is a really interesting thing. Now, I don't have any historical background to say that that's what it means. I just know that's what they said, and I thought that was really interesting.
I've looked into a little bit about the Brauche, I think, tradition in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Germans, and it's very much that way. They have this magic tradition that they consider that they're seeking to affect the will of God in healing people, or find water. Or, I think it's wonderful, but and even the question of self-interest, I think I credit your videos with opening my mind about this a lot, in fact, because I think there's a way that you could think that anything that I kind of want for myself is immediately suspect. Like, I have to.
You have to think about it.
Yeah, because to me, so I also watch Friedrich Xavier's videos, and he has the couple videos about why you shouldn't use baneful magic, and to me, of course, why would, but this is me, this is marshmallow me, why would I really take it on myself to want to harm somebody?
Right.
To me, that's just I guess that's gone from my nature, and I can see how some people do that, and I can really get behind, just saying, no, that's a bad idea. Trying to harm somebody because it's going to backfire. I mean, even if for no other reason than just the pure amoral mechanics of karma.
Yeah. So. Or even just the psychological way it's going to affect you from doing it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people who get really heavy into baneful haven't fully accepted that magic is real yet. I think that's a part of it. Is that you're right. Because there's some kind of a disconnect period, and it happened for me too, and it happens for a lot of people, where you're practicing magic it goes from you're practicing magic because you're curious if it's real,
Yeah.
to you're getting results, so you know something is real, but some part of you still hasn't quite embraced the idea that, like, when you ask for something using magic, there's a responsibility to that. That
Yeah.
it's like going out and doing something in the world. It's detached somehow. Where you're like, oh, if I do baneful magic on somebody, that's not me harming them. Like, yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you succeed at that, then there's the psychological repercussions that you would have if you went out and actually physically harmed somebody. Now,
Right.
some people will go out and physically harm people anyway, so they're not going to feel
Right.
any different from doing it because they already are dealing with those psychological implications from past
Hmm.
traumas. But
Hmm.
I mean, at the very least, if you're someone who's not had that experience, then baneful magic is going to give that to you, and you're going to realize real fast how like oops,
Yeah.
responsible for this. And then there's also the backlash, like you said, which some people have found ways to avoid, but that's a thing I wouldn't play with if I don't have to. To me,
Yeah. I
if you're going to
guess.
do baneful magic, you better really need to do it for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah. Because to me, it's there's the idea um, of not not harming anyone, and there's
Yeah,
kind of like the surface interpretation of is it the Wiccan read of Anna harm none do it,
yeah, yeah,
the surface interpretation of that when I was younger really just sort of put me off because I took it as there's just kind of like a flighty licentiousness, like, oh, I don't, as long as I can't have it proved to me that
yeah.
I'm actually, I can just, I'm going to go smoke dope all day,
Hmm.
kind of thing. Um, and once again, when you kind of start to think about it in a different way of deconstructing, well, what does the will mean? Is it my ego's will, or is it my purpose of what my
Yeah,
soul really wants, which
like a
is
higher
something
self
that's,
or
yeah,
or a God's will if you believe in that
yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah, which is something. And if I believe that I'm part of the divine, then I believe that what my soul really wants is something that's good. And if I'm trying to find ways to bring out this desire for good that is beneficial to everybody, to me that's just like sort of a no-brainer. Well,
Yeah.
that's good stuff.
And I kind of believe in that myself because I've had times where, and of course I experiment with different methods. So having spells not work is something I'm used to too. Because try something new, something doesn't work, so you tweak it.
Mm.
You keep trying to figure out how to make it work. But I've had times where I use the exact same steps that have worked time and time again, and it just doesn't work for some reason. I'm like, this
Mm.
particular thing I asked for is just not coming to me. And I
Mm.
can't figure out what's wrong, and I'll try different methods that have all worked in the past, and not happen, not happen, not happen. And in almost every one of those cases, within a few months, something will happen where I'll realize I don't want that.
Mm.
And it isn't because I didn't get it, it's because something else, I'll become aware of some other aspect of what that entails. And be
Mm.
like, oh man, I dodged a bullet by not getting that.
It's
Instead
almost as
of,
if you're being protected somehow.
right. And so it's made me wonder if it has to be in alignment with some kind of divine will, with some kind of like higher self or the grand infinity itself or whatever,
Yeah.
some kind of path that you're on. Where it's like, hey man, if you need a few dollars, you can cast a money spell and get it to come. But if you try to cast to become a millionaire and that's not part of your path, it ain't
Yeah.
coming. Like that
Right.
sort of thing. Now, if it is part of your path, boom,
Yeah.
now you're getting job offers and things and finding these opportunities to do entrepreneurship. If that's not you, it ain't gonna
Yeah.
come. And
Yeah.
I refrain from talking too much about it on the channel because I don't understand it or have a way to prove it. And also because it's going to make people think that I'm saying like, oh, anytime your magic doesn't work, it just wasn't supposed to work. That's not it at all. It's always been obvious within a few months why it didn't work. It's always been like, oh, that would have sucked.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me. To me, that's like very, very much in line with what I believe.
Hmm.
Personally and conventionally. We have a very,
And that type of thing, though, is hard for me to rectify with various models because I'm like,
yeah.
I gotta go. That's why I keep leaning more and more spiritual with every month as it goes by. Is that like more things lean toward this idea that there's some brand or something involved in this.
Hmm.
And so it's like, okay, I keep being shown that, so I'm gonna go with it.
Nice.
Well, it's been really enlightening talking to you today.
Likewise. Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate you letting me do this.
Is there anything last minute things you want to say before we part ways for the night?
Oh, I think I'd probably better leave it at that for now. I mean, I have a lot of things that I was going to talk about, but you know how these things go. It takes on a
Yeah,
life of its own in
definitely.
its own direction.
Oh yeah, I could go on all night.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks again, and until next time, safe travels.